Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to be continuing with Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined. And today, as I said, it's the 16th of December. I'm basically like hauling ass and reading as many chapters as I can before I have to go to work today. And I'm continuing with chapter 24, which is called Change. Because as you saw with the previous chapter, which was called The Choice, Edith made the decision that she's going to speed up the process of Beau's transformation by biting his throat to save him, because obviously it was too late for her to even try sucking the venom out of his bloodstream. But she was making the attempt. She was really dead set on trying to make that attempt, but obviously it was completely too late. Joss had bitten him way sooner than James did with Bella. So obviously that's the major plot difference here, is that Beau is going through the transformation way sooner, and his new life is going to begin way sooner. So before we begin the reading, I just have to make the quick disclaimer that I do not own any of the text being presented here, and I am not trying to present any of the text as my own. This is all simply a read aloud that I'm doing on the channel for entertainment purposes, and it's all in fair use. And again, Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined is owned by Stephenie Meyer, and this is chapter 24, Change. I ended up changing my mind. The fire in my arm wasn't really so bad. The worst thing I'd ever felt up to that point, yes. But not the same as my entire body on fire. I begged her to make it stop. I told her that this was really all I wanted, for the burning to stop, nothing else. I heard Archie telling her that everyone had said the same thing, reminding her that she'd begged Corinne to kill her too, telling her my first decision was the one that counted. I remember at one point screaming at him to shut up. I think he apologized. But mostly it was hard to pay attention to what was happening outside the fire. I know they moved me. It seemed like I was on the bloody vomit-covered wood floor for a long time, but it was hard to judge how the minutes passed. Sometimes Corinne would say something, and it would feel like a year had passed before Archie answered her, but it was probably just the fire that made the seconds into years. And then someone carried me. I saw the sun for another year-long second, and it looked pale and cool. Then everything was dark. It was dark for a long time. I could still see Edith. She held me in her arms, my face near hers, one of her hands on my cheek. Archie was nearby too. I think he had my legs. When I screamed, she apologized over and over again. I tried not to scream. It didn't do any good. There was no relief, no release in it. The fire didn't care what I did. It just burned. When my eyes were in focus, I could see dim lights moving across Edith's face, though all around her head it was just black. Aside from her voice and mine, the only sound was a deep, constant thrumming. Sometimes it got louder, and then it was quiet again. I didn't realize I was back in the black car until it stopped. I didn't hear the door open, but the sudden flash of light was blinding. I must have recoiled from it because Edith crooned in my ear. We're just stopping to refill the gas tank. We'll be home soon, Beau. You're doing so well. This will be over soon. I am so sorry. I couldn't feel her hand against my face. It should have been cool, but nothing was cool anymore. I tried to reach for it, but I couldn't exactly tell what my limbs were doing. I think I was thrashing some, but Edith and Archie kept me contained. Edith guessed what I wanted. She grabbed my hand and held it to her lips. I wished I could feel it. I tried to grip her hand without knowing how to make the muscles move or being able to feel them. Maybe I got it right. She didn't let go. It got darker. Eventually, I couldn't see her anymore. It was black as ink inside the car. There was no difference between having my eyes opened or closed. I started to panic. The fire made the night like a sensory deprivation chamber. I couldn't feel anything but pain. Not the seat beneath me. Not Archie restraining my legs. Not Edith holding my head, my hand. I was all alone with the burning, and I was terrified. I don't know what I must have gasped out. My voice was totally gone now, either raw from screaming or burned past usability. I couldn't guess which, but Edith's voice was in my ear again. I'm right here, Bo. You're not alone. I won't leave you. I will be here. Listen to my voice. I'm here with you. Her voice calmed me. Maybe the panic could go away, if not the pain. I listened, keeping my breathing shallow so I could hear her better. I didn't need to scream anymore. The burning only got more and more, never less. But I was adapting. It was all I could feel, but not all I could think about. I never wanted this for you, Bo, Edith continued. I would give anything to take this away. I've made so many mistakes. I should have stayed away from you from the first day. I should never have come back again. I've destroyed your life. I've taken everything from you. It sounded like she was sobbing again. No, I tried to say, but I'm not sure if I even shaped the word with my mouth. He's probably far enough along that he'll remember this, Archie said softly. I hope so, Edith said, her voice breaking. I'm just saying you might use the time more productively. There is so much he doesn't know. You're right, she sighed. Where do I begin? You could explain about being thirsty, Archie suggested. That was the hardest part when I first woke up, and we'll be expecting a lot from him. When Edith answered, it was like she was spitting the words through her teeth. I won't hold him to that. He didn't choose this. He's free to become whatever he wants. Ha! Archie said. You know I'm better than that, Edith. The other way won't be good enough for him. Do you see? He'll be fine. It was quiet while she tuned into whatever Archie was seeing inside his head. Though I understood the silence, it still left me alone in the fire. I started panicking again. I'm here, Bo. I'm here. Don't be afraid. She took a deep breath. I'll keep talking. There are so many things to tell you. The first one is that when this passes, when you're new, you won't exactly be the same as I am, not in the very beginning. Being a young vampire means certain things, and the hardest to ignore is the thirst. You'll be thirsty all the time. You won't be able to think about much else for a while. Maybe a year, maybe 2. It's different for everyone. As soon as this is over, I'll take you hunting. You wanted to see that, didn't you? We'll bring Eleanor so you can see her bear impression. She laughed, a damaged little sound. If you want to live with us, it will be hard, especially in the beginning. It might be too hard, and I understand that. We all do. If you want to try it my way, I'll go with you. I can tell you who the human monsters are. There are options. Whatever you want. If you don't want me with you, I'll understand that too, Bo. I swear I won't follow you if you tell me not to. No, I gasped. I heard myself that time, so I knew I'd done it right. You don't have to make any more decisions now. There's time for that. Just know that I will respect any decision you make. She took another deep breath. I should probably warn you about your eyes. They won't be blue anymore. A half sob. Don't let them frighten you. They won't stay so bright for long. I suppose that's a very small thing, though. I should focus on the most important things. The hard things. The very worst thing. Oh, I'm so sorry, Bo. You can't see your father or mother again. It's not safe. You would hurt them. You wouldn't be able to help yourself. And there are rules. Rules that, as your creator, I'm bound by. We'd both be held responsible if you ran out of control. Oh, she caught her breath. There's so much he doesn't know, Archie. We've got time, Edith. Just relax. Take it slow. I heard her inhale again. The rules, she said. One rule with 1,000 different permutations. The reality of vampires must be kept secret. That means newborn vampires must be controlled. I will teach you. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Another sigh. And you can't tell anyone what you are. I broke that rule. I don't think it could hurt you, that anyone would ever find out. I should have known that just being near you would eventually destroy you. I should have known I would ruin your life, that I was lying to myself about any other path being possible. I've done everything wrong. You're letting self-castigation get in the way of the information again, Edith. Right. A deep breath. Oh, do you remember the painting in Crane's study? The 9-time patrons of the arts I told you about? They're called the Volturi. They are, for the lack of a better word, the police of our world. I'll tell you more about them in a bit. You just need to know that they exist. so that I can explain why you can't tell Charlie or your mother where you are. You can't talk to them again, Bo. Her voice was straining higher, like it was about to fracture. It's best. We don't have much choice but to let them think you're dead. I'm so sorry. You don't even get to say goodbye. It's not fair. There was a long pause before I could hear her breath hitching. Why don't you go back to the Volturi? Archie suggested. Keep emotion out of it. You're right, she repeated in a whisper. Ready to learn new world history, Bo? She talked all night without a break, until the sun came up and I could see her face again. She told me stories that sounded like dark fairy tales. I was beginning to grasp the edges of how big this world was, but I knew it would be a long time before I could totally comprehend the size of it. She told me about the people I'd seen in the painting with Corrine, the Volturi, how they'd joined forces during the Mycenaean Age and begun a millennia-long campaign to create a peace and order in the vampire world, how there had been 6 of them in the beginning, how betrayal and murder had cut them in half. Someone named Aro had murdered his sister, his best friend's wife. That best friend was Marcus. He was the man I'd seen standing with Corrine, Aro's own wife, Sulpicia, the one with all the masses of dark hair in the painting, had been the only witness. She turned him over to Marcus and their soldiers. There had been some question of what to do. Aro had a very powerful extra gift, like what Edith had, but more, she said, and the Volturi weren't sure they'd be able to succeed without him. But Sulpicia searched out a young girl, Meili, the one Edith had called a servant and a thief, who had a gift of her own. She could absorb another vampire's gift. She couldn't use that stolen gift herself, but she could give it to someone else who was touching. Sulpicia had Meili take Aro's gift, and then Marcus executed him. Once she had her husband's gift, Sulpicia found out that the third man in their group was in on the plot. He was executed too, and his wife, Athenadora, joined with Sulpicia and Marcus to lead their soldiers. They overthrew the vampires who terrorized Europe, and then the ones who enslaved Egypt. Once they were in charge, they made regulations that kept the vampires hidden and that kept the vampire world hidden and safe. I listened as much as I could. It wasn't a distraction from the pain. There was no escape, but it was better to think about that than the fire. Edith said the Volturi were the ones who'd made up all the stories about crosses and holy water and mirrors. Over the centuries, they made all reports of vampires into myth, and now they continued to keep it that way. Vampires would stay in the shadows, or there would be consequences. So I couldn't go to my dad's house and let him see the eyes that Edith said would be bright. I couldn't drive to Florida and hug my mom and let her know that I wasn't dead. I couldn't even call her and explain the confusing message I'd left on her answering machine. If there was anything in the news, if any rumor spread that something unnatural was involved, the Volturi soldiers might come to investigate. I had to disappear quietly. The fire hurt more than hearing these things. But I knew that wouldn't always be the way it was. Soon this hurt would be the worst. Edith moved on quickly, telling me about their friends in Canada who lived the same way, 3 blonde Russian brothers and 2 Spanish vampires who were the Collins' closest family. She told me that 2 of them had extra powers. Curiel could do something electrical, and Alina knew the talents of every vampire she met. She told me about other friends all over the world, in Ireland and Brazil and Egypt. So many names. Eventually Archie stepped in again and told her to prioritize. Edith told me that I would never age, that I would always be 17 like she was, that the world would change around me and I would remember all of it, never forgetting 1 second. She told me how the Collins lived, how they moved from cloudy place to cloudy place. Ernest would restore a house for them. Archie would invest their assets with amazingly good returns. They would decide on a story to explain their relationships to each other, and Jessamine would create new names and new documented pasts for each of them. Corrine would take a job in a hospital with her new credentials, or she'd return to school to study a new field. If the location looked promising, the younger Cullens would pretend to be even younger than they were, so they could stay longer. After my time as a new vampire was up, I would be able to go back to school, but my education wouldn't have to wait. I had a lot of time ahead of me, and I would remember everything I read or heard. I would never sleep again. Food would be disgusting to me. I would never be hungry again. only thirsty. I would never get sick. I would never feel tired. I would be able to run faster than a race car. I'd be stronger than any other living species on the planet. I wouldn't need to breathe. I would be able to see more clearly, even hear the smallest sound. My heart would finish beating tomorrow or the next day, and it would never beat again. I would be a vampire. One good thing about the burning, it let me hear all this with some distance. It let me process what she was telling me without emotion. I knew the emotion would come later. When it was starting to get dark again, our journey was over. Edith carried me into the house like I was a child and sat with me in the big room. The background behind her face went from black to white. I could see her much more clearly now, and I didn't think it was just the light. In her eyes, my face reflected back, and I was surprised to see that it looks like a face and not a charcoal brocade, though a face in anguish. Still, maybe I wasn't the pile of ash I felt like. She told me stories to fill the time. The others took turns helping her. Corinne sat on the ground next to me and told me the most amazing story about Jules's family. That her great-grandmother had actually been a werewolf. All the things Jules had scoffed about were straight history. Corinne told me she'd promised them she would never bite another human. It was part of the treaty between them, the treaty that meant the Cullens could never go due west to the ocean. Jessamine told me her story after all. I guess she decided I was ready now. I was glad when she did, that my emotions were mostly buried under the fire. She'd lost her family too, when the man who created her stole her without warning. She told me about the army she'd belonged to, a life of carnage and death, and then breaking free. She told me about the day Archie had let her find him. Ernest told me how his life had ended before he'd killed himself, about his unstable alcoholic wife and the daughter he'd loved more than his own soul. He told me about the night when his wife, in a drunken rampage, had jumped off a cliff with his little daughter in her arms, and how he hadn't been able to do anything but follow after them. Then he told me how, after the pain, there had been the most beautiful woman in a nurse's uniform, a nurse he recognized from a happier time in another place when he was just a young man, a nurse who hadn't aged at all. Eleanor told me about being attacked by a bear, and then seeing an angel who took her to Corinne instead of to heaven. She told me how she'd thought at first she'd been sent to hell, justly, she admitted, and then she got into heaven after all. She was the one who told me that the redhead had gotten away. He'd never come near Charlie after the one time that he'd searched Charlie's house. When we'd all gone back to Forks, she, Royal, and Jessamine had followed the man's trail as far as they could. It disappeared into the Salish Sea, and they hadn't been able to find the place where he came back out. For all they knew, he'd swum straight out to the Pacific and onto another continent. He must have assumed that Joss had lost the fight and realized it was smarter to disappear. Even Royal took a turn. He told me about a life consumed with vanity, with material things, with ambition. He told me about the only daughter of a powerful man. Exactly what kind of power this man wielded, Royal hadn't entirely understood, and how Royal had planned to marry her and become heir to the dynasty, how the beautiful daughter pretended to love him to please her father, and then how she had watched when her lover from a rival criminal syndicate had Royal beaten to death, how she'd laughed aloud the whole time. He told me about the revenge he'd gotten. Royal was the least careful with his words. He told me about losing his family, and how none of this was worth what he'd lost. Edith had whispered Eleanor's name. He'd growled once and left. I think it must have been a while Royal or Eleanor was talking that Archie watched Joss's video from the dance studio. When Royal was gone, Archie took his spot. At first I wasn't sure what they were talking about because Edith was speaking out loud, but eventually I caught up. Archie was searching right there on his laptop, trying to narrow down the options of where he'd been kept in his human life. I was glad he didn't seem to mention anything else about the tape. The focus was all on his past. I was trying to remember how to use my voice so that I could stop him if he tried to say anything about the rest of it. I hoped Archie was smart enough to have destroyed the tape before Edith could watch. The stories helped me think of other things. Prepare myself while the fire burned. But I was only able to pay partial attention. My mind was cataloging the fire, experiencing it in new ways. It was amazing how each inch of my skin, each millimeter, was so distinct. It was like I could feel all my cells burning individually. I could feel the difference between the pain in the walls of my lungs and the way the fire felt in the soles of my feet, inside my eyelids, inside my eyeballs, and down my spine. All the different agonies clearly separated. I could hear my heart thudding. It seemed so loud, like it had been hooked up to an amp. I could hear other things too, mostly Edith's voice, sometimes the others talking, though I couldn't see them. I heard music once, but I didn't know where it was coming from. It seems like I was on the couch, my head in Edith's lap, for several years. The lights stayed bright, so I didn't know if it was night or day, but Edith's eyes were always gold, so I guessed that the fire was lying about the time again. I was so aware of every nerve ending in my body that I knew immediately when something changed. It started with my toes. I couldn't feel them. It seems like the fire had finally won, that it had started burning off pieces of me. Edith had said I was changing, not dying, but in this moment of panic, I thought she'd gotten it wrong. Maybe this vampire thing wouldn't work on me. Maybe all this burning had been just a slow way to die. The worst way. Edith felt me freaking out again, and she started humming in my ear. I tried to look at the positives. If it was killing me, at least it would be over. And if it was going to end, at least I was in Edith's arms for the rest of my life. And then I realized that my toes were still there. They just weren't burning anymore. In fact, the fire was pulling out of the soles of my feet too. I was glad I'd made sense of what was happening, because my fingers were next. No need for more panic. Maybe a reason for hope. The fire was leaving. Only it seemed to be doing more than leaving. It was moving. All the fire that receded from my extremities seemed to be draining into the center of my body, stoking the blaze there so that it was hotter than before. I couldn't believe there was such a thing as hotter. My heart, already so loud, starting beating faster. The core of the fire seemed to be centered there. It was sucking the flames in from my hands and my ankles, leaving them pain-free, but multiplying the heat and pain in my heart. "Corrine!" Edith called. Corrine walked into the room, and the amazing part about that was that I heard her. Edith and her family never made any noise when they moved, but now, if I listened, I could hear the low sound of Corine's lips brushing together as she spoke. "Ah, it's almost over." I wanted to be relieved, but the growing agony in my chest made it impossible to feel anything else. I stared up at Edith's face. She was more beautiful than she had ever been, because I could see her better than I ever had, but I couldn't really appreciate her. So much pain. "Edith," I gasped. "You're all right, Bo. It's ending. I'm sorry. I know. I remember. The fire ripped hotter through my heart, dragging the flames up from my elbows and knees. I thought about Edith going through this, suffering this way, and it put a different perspective on my pain. She didn't even know Corrine then. She didn't know what was happening to her. She hadn't been held the whole time in the arms of someone she loved. The pain was almost gone from everywhere but my chest. The only leftover was my throat, but it was a different kind of burn now. Drier. Irritating. I heard more footsteps, and I was pretty sure I could tell the difference between them. The decisive, confident step was Eleanor. I was positive. Archie was the quicker, more rhythmic motion. Ernest was a little slower, thoughtful. Jessamine was the one who stopped by the door. I thought I heard royal breathing behind her, and then, my heart took off, beating like helicopter blades. The sound almost a single sustained note. It felt like it would grind through my ribs. The fire flared up in the center of my chest, sucking all the flames from the rest of my body to fuel the most painful burn yet. It was enough to stun me. My body bowed like the fire was dragging me upward by my heart. It felt like a war inside me, my racing heart blitzing against the raging fire. They were both losing. The fire constricted tighter, concentrating into one fist-sized ball of pain with a final unbearable surge. The surge was answered by a deep, hollow-sounding thud. My heart stuttered twice, then thudded quietly again one more time. There was no sound, no breathing, not even mine. For a second, all I could process was the absence of pain. The dull, dry afterburn in my throat was easy to ignore, because every other part of me felt amazing. The release was an incredible high. I stared up at Edith in wonder. I felt like I'd taken off a blindfold I'd been wearing all my life. "What a view, Beau?" she asked. Now that I could really concentrate on it, the beauty of her voice was unreal. "It's disorienting, I know. You get used to it. Could you get used to hearing a voice like this? Seeing a face like that?" "Edith," I said, and the sound of my own voice jolted me. Was that me? It didn't sound like me. It didn't sound human. Unnerved, I reached out to touch her cheek. In the same instant that the desire to touch her entered my mind, my hand was cradling the side of her face. There was no in-between, no process of lifting my hand, watching it move to its destination. It was just there. Huh. She leaned into my touch, put her hand over mine, and held it against her face. It was strange because it was familiar. I'd always loved it when she'd done that. To see that she so obviously liked it when I touched her that way, that it meant something to her, but it was also nothing the same. Her face wasn't cold anymore. Her hand felt right against mine. There was no difference between us now. I stared into her eyes, then looked closer at the picture reflected in them. Ah! A little gasp escaped my throat by accident, and I felt my body lock down in surprise. It was weird. It felt like the natural thing to do, to be a statue, because I was shocked. "What is it, Beau?" She leaned closer, concerned, but that just brought the reflection closer. "The eyes," I breathed. She sighed and wrinkled her nose. "It goes away," she promised. I terrified myself every time I looked in the mirror for 6 months. 6 months, I murmured. "And then they'll be gold like yours." She looked away over the back of the couch to someone standing there behind us where I couldn't see. I wanted to sit up and look around, but I was a little afraid to move. My body felt so strange. "That depends on your diet, Beau," Crane said calmly. "If you hunt like we do, your eyes will eventually turn this color. If not, your eyes will look like Lauren's did." I decided to try sitting up, and like before, thinking was doing. Without any movement, I was upright. Edith kept my hand in hers as it left her face. Behind the sofa, they were all there watching. I'd been 100% with my guesses. Cream closest, then Eleanor, Archie, and Ernest. Jasmine in the doorway to another room, with Royal watching over her shoulder. I looked at their faces, shocked again. If my brain had been so much roomier than before, I would have forgotten what I was about to say. As it was, I recovered pretty fast. "No, I want to do it your way," I said to Corrine. "That's the right thing to do." Corrine smiled. It would have knocked the breath out of me if I had to breathe. "If only it were that easy. But that's a noble choice. We'll help you all we can." Edith touched my arm. "We should hunt now, Beau. It will make your throat hurt less." When she mentioned my throat, the dry burn was suddenly at the forefront of my mind. I swallowed, but hunt? My new voice asked. I've never been hunting before. Not even like normal hunting with rifles, so I don't really think I could. I have no idea. Eleanor chuckled under her breath. Edith smiled. "I'll show you. It's very easy, very natural. Didn't you want to see me hunt?" "Just us?" I checked. She looked confused for a fraction of a second, and then her face was smooth. "Of course, whatever you want. Come with me, Beau." And she was on her feet, still holding my hand. Then I was on my feet too, and it was so simple to move. I wondered why I'd been afraid to try. Anything I wanted this body to do, it did. She darted to the back wall of the big room, the glass wall that was a mirror now because it was night outside. I saw the two pale figures flashing by, and I stopped. The strange thing was that when I stopped, it was so sudden that Edith kept going, still holding my hand, and though she was still pulling, I didn't move. My grip on her hand pulled her back, like it was nothing, but I was only noticing that with part of my brain. Mostly I was looking at my reflection. I'd seen my face warped around the convex shape of her eyes, just the center, lacking the edges. I'd only really seen my eyes, brilliant, almost glowing red, and that had been enough to pull my focus. Now I saw my whole face, my neck, my arms. If someone had cut an outline of my human self, this version would still fit into that space. But though I took up the same volume, all the angles were different, harder, more pronounced, like someone had made an ice sculpture of me and left the edges sharp. My eyes, it was hard to look around the color, but the shape of them too seemed different, so vaguely, like I was remembering something I'd seen only through muddy water. I remembered how my eyes used to look, undecided, like I was never sure who I was. Then after Edith, still so hard to see in my memory, uncomfortable to try, they were suddenly more resolved. These eyes had gone one step further than resolved. They were savage. If I walked into this self in the dark alley, I would be terrified of me. Which was the point, I guess. People were supposed to be afraid of me now. I still wore my blood-stained jeans, but I had an unfamiliar pale blue shirt on. I didn't remember that happening, but I could understand. Vampire or human, no one wanted to hang around with someone drenched in vomit. Whoa, I said. I locked eyes with Edith in the reflection. This was strange, too, because the beau in the mirror, right next to Edith, like he belonged, not like before, when people could only imagine that she was taking pity on me. It's a lot, she said. I took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. She pulled on my hand again, and I followed. Before a fourth of the second had passed, we were through the glass doors, behind the stairs, and on the back lawn. There was no moon and no stars. The clouds were too thick. It should have been pitch black outside the rectangle of light shining through the glass wall, but it wasn't. I could see everything. Whoa, I said again. This is so cool. Edith looked at me like she was surprised by my reaction. Had she forgotten what it was like the first time she saw the world through vampire eyes? I thought she'd said I wouldn't forget things anymore. We're going to have to go a ways out into the woods, she told me. Just in case. I remembered the gist of what she told me about hunting. Right. So there aren't any people around. Got it. Again. That same surprised look flashed across her face and then was gone. Follow me, she said. She whipped down the lawn so fast that I knew she would have been invisible to my old eyes. Then, at the edge of the river, she launched herself into a high arc that spun her over the river and into the trees beyond. Really? I called after her. I heard her laugh. I promise. It's easy. Great. I sighed, then started running. Running had never been my forte. I was all right on a flat track if I was paying enough attention, and I kept my eyes on my feet. Okay, honestly, even then I was still able to tangle my feet up and down. Up and go down. This was so different. I was flying down the lawn, faster than I had ever moved, but it was only too simple to put my feet exactly where they were supposed to go. I could feel all of my muscles, almost see the connections as they worked together, will them to do exactly what I needed. When I got to the edge of the river, I didn't even pause. I pushed off the rock she'd used, and then I was really flying. The river slipped away behind me as I rocketed through the air. I passed where she'd landed and then fell down into the wood. I felt an instant of panic when I realized I hadn't even considered the landing. But then my hand already seemed to know how to catch a thick branch and angle my body so that my feet hit the ground with barely a sound. Holy crow! I breathed in total disbelief. I heard Edith running through the trees, and already her gait was as familiar to me as the sound of my own breathing. I was sure I could tell the difference between the sound of her footfalls and anyone else's. We have to do that again, I said as soon as I saw her. She paused a few feet away from me, and a frustrated expression that I knew well crossed her face. I laughed. What do you want to know? I'll tell you what I'm thinking. She frowned. I don't understand. You're in a very good mood. Oh, is that wrong? Aren't you incredibly thirsty? I swallowed against the burn. It was bad, but not as bad as the rest of the fire I'd just left behind. The first burn was always there, and it got worse when I focused on it. But there were so many other things to focus on. Yes, when I think about it. Edith squared her shoulders. If you want to do this faster, that's fine too. I looked at her. I was obviously missing something. Do this? Do what? She stared at me for a second, her eyes doubtful. Suddenly she threw her hands up. You know, I really thought that when your mind was more similar to mine, I'd be able to hear it. I guess that's never going to happen. Sorry. She laughed, but there was an unhappy note in the sound. Honestly, Beau, can you please give me a clue as to what we're talking about? You wanted us to be alone, she said like this was an explanation. Yeah. Because you had some things you wanted to say to me? She braced her shoulders again, tensing like she was expecting something bad. Oh, well, I guess there are things to say. I mean, there's one important thing, but I wasn't thinking about that. Seeing how frustrated she was by whatever misunderstanding was happening, I was totally honest. I wanted to be alone with you because, well, I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to do this hunting thing in front of Eleanor. I confessed. I figured there was a good chance I could screw something up, and I don't know Eleanor all that well yet, but I have a feeling she would find that pretty funny. Her eyes got wide. You were afraid Eleanor would laugh at you? Really? That's all? Really, your turn, Edith. What did you think was happening? She hesitated. I thought you were being a gentleman. I thought you preferred to yell at me alone rather than in front of my family. I froze up again. I wondered if that was going to happen every time I was surprised. It took me a second to thaw out. Yell at you? I repeated. Edith, oh, you're talking about all that stuff that you were saying in the car, right? Sorry about that. Sorry? What on earth are you apologizing for now, Beau Swan? She looked angry and so beautiful. I couldn't guess why she was worked up. I shrugged. I wanted to tell you then, but I couldn't. I couldn't even really concentrate. Of course you couldn't concentrate, Edith! I crossed the space between us in one invisibly fast stride and put my hands on her shoulders. You'll never know what I'm thinking if you keep interrupting me. The anger on her face faded as she deliberately calmed herself. Then she nodded. Okay, I said. In the car, I wanted to tell you that you didn't need to apologize. I felt horrible that you were sad. This isn't your fault. She started to say something, so I put my finger over her lips. And it isn't all bad, I continued. Well, my head is still spinning, and I know there are a million things to think about, and I'm sad, of course, but I'm also good, Edith. I'm always good when I'm with you. She stared at me for a long minute. Slowly, she raised her hand to pull my finger away from her mouth. I didn't stop her. You aren't angry at me for what I've done to you? She asked quietly. Edith, you saved my life. Again. Why would I be angry? Because of the way you saved it? What else could you have done? She exhaled, almost like she was mad again. How can you, Beau, you have to see that this is all my fault. I haven't saved your life. I've taken it from you. Charlie, Renee. I put my finger over her mouth again and then took a deep breath. Yes, it's hard, and it's going to be hard for a long time. Maybe forever, right? But why would I put that on you? Joss is the one who, killed me. You brought me back to life. She pushed my hand down. If I hadn't involved you in my world... I laughed, and she looked up at me like I'd lost my mind. Edith, if you hadn't involved me in your world, Charlie and Renee would have lost me 3 months earlier. She stared, frowning. It was obvious she wasn't accepting any of this. Do you remember what I said when you saved my life in Port Angeles? The second time or third? I barely did. The words were easier to bring back than the images. I knew it was something like this. That you were messing with fate because my number was up? Well, if I had to die, Edith, isn't this the most amazing way to do it? A long minute passed while she stared at me, and then she shook her head. Beau, you are amazing. You are amazing. I guess I am now. You always have been. I didn't say anything, and my face gave me away. Or she was just that good. She knew my face so well. She spent so much time trying so hard to understand me that she knew immediately when there was something I wasn't saying. What is it, Beau? Just something Joss said. I winced, though it was hard to see things in my old memory. The dance studio was the most recent, the most vivid. Edith's jaw got hard. She said a lot of things. She hissed. Oh! Suddenly I wanted to punch something, but I also didn't want to let go of Edith to do that. You saw the tape. Her face was totally white, furious and agonized at the same time. Yes, I saw the tape. When? I didn't hear. Headphones. I wish you hadn't. She shook her head. I had to. But forget that now. Which lie were you thinking of? She spit the words through her teeth. It took me a minute. You didn't want me to become a vampire. No, I absolutely did not. So that part wasn't a lie. And you've been so upset. I know you feel bad about Charlie and my mom, but I guess I'm worried that part of it is because, you didn't expect to have me around very long and you weren't planning for that. Her mouth flew open so fast that I put my whole hand over it. Because if that's what it is, don't worry. If you want me to go away after a while, I can. could show me what to do so I won't get either of us in trouble. I don't expect you to put up with me forever. You didn't choose this any more than I did. I want you to know that I'm aware of that. She waited for me to move my hand. I did it slowly. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what was next. She growled softly and flashed her teeth at me, not in a smile. You're lucky I didn't bite you, she said. The next time you put your hand on my mouth or to say something so completely idiotic and insulting, I will. Sorry. She closed her eyes. Her arms wrapped around my waist and she leaned her head against my chest. My arms wound around her automatically. She tilted her head up so she could look at me. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Beau. Is having you with me, getting to keep you here. It's like I've been granted every selfish wish I've ever had. But the price for everything I want was to take the exact same thing away from you. All of your life, I'm angry with myself. I'm disappointed in myself. And I wish so much that I could bring that tracker back to life so I could kill her myself over and over again. The reason I didn't want you to be a vampire wasn't because you weren't special enough. It was because you were too special and you deserve more. I wanted you to have what we all miss, a human life. But you have to know, if it were only about me, if there was no price for you to pay, then tonight would be the best night of my life. I've been staring forever in the face for a century, and tonight is the very first time it's looked beautiful to me because of you. Don't you ever think that I don't want you. I will always want you. I don't deserve you, but I will always love you. Are we clear? It was obvious that she was being totally sincere. Truth echoed in every word. A huge grin spread across my face. So that's okay then, she smiled back. I'd say so. That was the one important thing I wanted to say. Just, I love you. I always will. I knew that from pretty early on. So, with that being how things are, I think we can work out the rest. I held her face in my hand and bent down to kiss her. Like everything else, this was so easy now. Nothing to worry about. No hesitation. It felt strange, though, that my heart wasn't beating out a crazy drum solo, that the blood wasn't stampeding through my veins, but something was zinging through me like electricity. Every move, every nerve in my body alive, more than alive, like all my cells were rejoicing. I wanted to hold her like this, and I would need nothing else for the next 100 years. She broke away, and she was laughing. This time her laugh was full of joy. It sounded like singing. How are you doing this? She laughed. You're supposed to be a newborn vampire, and here you are discussing the future calmly with me, smiling at me, kissing me. You're supposed to be thirsty and nothing else. I'm a lot of else, I said. But I am pretty thirsty now that you mention it. She leaned up on her toes and kissed me once, hard. I love you. Let's go hunt. We ran together in the darkness that wasn't dark, and I was unafraid. This would be easy. I knew. Just like everything else. Oh my gosh! Oh, I love that ending. But we have one more to go. We have the epilogue and then the afterword that Stephenie Meyer puts at the end. I'm going to do that next soon enough. But oh my god, that was so freaking sweet to like see how he was processing the entire transformation from like start to finish, and like how all the family members were like gathering around and telling him like their backstories, like the revised backstories that Stephenie Meyer gave them, like Jessamine, how she was taken, from her home and she fought in the Southern Vampire Wars, how Royal like basically suffered through the worst humiliation with his fiance basically, using him in every single possible way and like leading to him getting the living crap beaten out of him in the streets by some crime syndicate guy. Like, oh man, Royal, Jesus Christ, like his story, like I wouldn't say that it compares to Rosalie's rape story, but definitely like Stephenie Meyer, I'm glad that she did it that way for Royal, that she did it so differently and that she didn't make it like a rape or anything, because obviously there are no gay characters in her stories at all whatsoever. And I'm not saying that that's because of you know, her being like homophobic or anything like that. I do not know what her personal feelings are towards that sort of thing, so I cannot say anything about that. But overall, I like the fact that she didn't choose to have Royal get raped by a group of men at all whatsoever, and that she went out of her way to at least sensitively make it different, because she had to have known that if she did that for her book, then that would just be a bad look on her part, because who wants like their first introduction of like gay or LGBT characters in a book to be something outwardly so horrible and so like bad? You know what I mean? Nobody wants that. And she understood that just as well. And I'm so happy that that was what she chose not to do, and that she chose to do something completely different with Royal's story as opposed to Rosalie's rape story. Like, thank God she did it that way, and that she had enough sensitivity to realize that. Like, she is not, you know, as insensitive as some people like love to say that she is, saying everything that they could possibly about her, because I mean, I get it, she's Mormon, so obviously her religious beliefs will be reflected in her works, but she doesn't do it in a way that makes you feel alienated in any way at all whatsoever. It's not like she's going out of her way to try converting you to the LDS church at all whatsoever. She doesn't see that as her job. She sees it as her job to write an entertaining, good story that is going to get you invested in reading it, and she doesn't want to be divisive about it. And overall, I do like that about her, the fact that she had enough sensitivity to realize that with this story, and that she actually went out of her way to make Royal's story like comparably different to Rosalie's story. So thank God for that. Thank God. But I have to say, with Stephenie Meyer, like, she did it in a way that was pretty freaking brilliant in my opinion, and I have to say that I really enjoyed reading this entire chapter, like seeing Beau's entire transformation play out, and seeing how he was taking it, and seeing how he was being prepared for basically everything that was going to come for him in this new life that he's being given by Edith. And oh man, and now all we have left is the epilogue, which is called An Occasion, and then the afterword, and we're going to decide for ourselves how this new universe is going to play out, I guess. We're going to see how it plays out. I mean, I can only imagine how differently the events of New Moon and Eclipse played out in the end, when with this after effect of life and death. So overall, that is my reading of this chapter for Life and Death Twilight Reimagined. If you guys are brand new, you can subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoyed the reading, you can leave a comment down below and also leave a like on the video, and we'll be continuing with the epilogue, which is called An Occasion, where something very special is going to occur, and no, it's not the senior prom. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice day, everyone. See ya!